How one bakery burned down London. The Great Fire of London officially killed only 6 people. 6 people for 4 days of fire. But it destroyed 13,200 houses, 87 churches, and left 100,000 people sleeping in open fields outside the city walls. And it all began in one bakery. Thomas Farriner supplied ship's biscuit to the Royal Navy. His bakery stood on a narrow street called Pudding Lane in the heart of the old city. Sometime before 3 in the morning, fire broke out at or near his oven. The timber, the drought, and the wind were all waiting. London, in the summer of 1666, was almost entirely built of wood. Houses leaned across streets so narrow that neighbors on opposite sides could nearly reach out and touch each other. That summer had been cruelly dry. Months of heat and near drought conditions had left the city's beams and planks desiccated, as ready to catch fire as kindling. On the night of the 1st of September, a strong east wind was blowing directly through the city. Any fire it caught, it would carry westward with speed. Farriner and his family escaped. They climbed from an upstairs window and scrambled across to a neighboring rooftop. A maidservant stayed behind. She would not jump. Evidence suggests she became one of the fire's first known victims, though her name is not reliably recorded in what survives. Word reached the Lord Mayor of London, Sir Thomas Bloodworth. He was woken in the early hours and came to Pudding Lane to see for himself. What Bloodworth saw did not alarm him. He decided the fire was minor, not worth the disruption of ordering buildings demolished, pulling down buildings to create a gap of a fire break. Was the standard way to stop a city fire from spreading. Historians consistently identify Bloodworth's failure to order it as the decisive mistake of those first hours. Bloodworth inspected, dismissed it, and went back to bed. No demolition order was given. The fire's first critical hours slipped past. An east wind was already pushing the flames west into the old timber city. By the time anyone with real authority acted, the fire had moved beyond local control. A strong easterly wind had been blowing since the night before. It pushed the fire westward through London's narrow lanes, where timber houses stood so close their upper stories nearly touched. The fire reached Thames Street, a long corridor running along the riverside. Its warehouses held oil, pitch, tar, tallow, and coal. When those stores caught, the fire changed. Pitch and tar burned fast and brutally hot. The blaze grew into something no bucket brigade could approach. Thames Street did not just burn, it acted as an accelerant. One warehouse after another went up, feeding the fire heat it had never had before. Samuel Pepys was out on the Thames by boat that morning. He watched from the water. What he witnessed convinced him this was no ordinary emergency. Pepys did not go home. He went directly to Whitehall, or the Royal Palace, to find the king. He told Charles VI that houses had to be pulled down ahead of the fire, creating empty gaps, fire breaks to starve the blaze of fuel. It was the first accurate account anyone in authority had received, but pulling down houses took time the fire did not give. The wind kept pushing west and north through the city's packed lanes, jumping from roof to roof. By the 3rd and 4th of September, the fire had reached Old St. Paul's Cathedral. The medieval building had stood for centuries. That was about to end. The cathedral's medieval lead roof melted. Thick silver rivulets ran down through the surrounding cobblestones, flowing in the streets like a slow flood of liquid metal. The fire was no longer a neighborhood disaster. It was consuming the city wholesale. By the 4th of September, the fire had burned for 3 days. The king himself rode out. King Charles II and his brother James, Duke of York, took direct command of foul firefighting operations. They rode through the smoke, handing coins to workers. Someone needed the authority to give the order, and now someone had it. The strategy that was finally working was not water. It was destruction. Workers drove long iron hooks into building facades and pulled. The structures collapsed before the fire could reach them. When iron hooks weren't enough, they used gunpowder. Charges were packed into buildings ahead of the blaze and detonated. Timbers flew outward. Gaps opened in the dense streetscape, wide enough finally to starve the fire of fuel. Earlier, orders to pull buildings down had stalled, but property owners resisted. Officials hesitated, and the king's presence broke that deadlock, and the scale of demolition required royal authority to compel. Then the wind changed. The east wind that had driven the fire for days simply dropped. The fire breaks held. By the 5th of September 1666, the fire was largely out. It had taken 4 days to burn through the oldest part of London. Roughly 373 acres inside the city walls had been reduced to ash. Around 13,200 houses were gone. 87 of the city's 109 parish churches were destroyed or severely damaged, though the precise count varies slightly depending on the source. The fire had not been drowned. It had been starved, pulled apart, blown apart, piece by piece, until there was nothing left ahead of it to burn. Official records put the death toll at 6. Historians believe that number is almost certainly wrong. Those without property or burial registers and the poorest Londoners went largely uncounted, and evidence suggests some died later from exposure in the camps outside the city walls. In the months after the fire, a French watchmaker named Robert Hubert confessed to starting it deliberately. He said he had thrown a fireball through a bakery window. He was tried, convicted, and hanged at Tyburn on 27 October 1666. There was a serious problem with that confession. Evidence establishes that Hubert did not arrive in England until 2 days after the fire began. His account contained geographical errors about PUD Ing Lane, and the ship's captain who brought him confirmed the timeline under oath. A parliamentary committee investigated in early 1667. It concluded the fire was an accident caused by a great wind and an exceptionally dry season. The committee found no credible evidence of a foreign plot or Catholic conspiracy. Thomas Farriner, the baker on Pudding Lane, denied responsibility. He claimed his ovens had been checked and extinguished before he retired, and no investigation ever proved or disproved his account. Historians regard accidental ignition as the most probable cause, but it cannot be confirmed. The fire killed very few people. What it destroyed was a city. Medieval London, its timber streets, its crooked lanes, its overhanging houses, was simply gone. Parliament passed rebuilding laws in 1667. Timber construction was banned. Every new building had to be brick or stone, and the streets were required to be made wider. Wren is credited with designing around 51 new churches for the city, though historians debate how much of that work came from his office rather than Wren himself. He also designed the new St. Paul's Cathedral, which was not completed until 1710. Wren and the scientist Robert Hooke also built a memorial column. Construction ran from 1671 to 1677. The column stands 202 feet tall and is positioned exactly 202 feet from Farriner's bakery on Pudding Lane. If it ever fell, it would point directly. Tell us which of history's stories should be in crayon next. Comment below.